Why hello there. Back in November, Elden Ring got a closed network test, which I will refer to as the CNT, and with it some item descriptions that were the basis for so much speculation leading up to release. And if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I spent a lot of time with those item descriptions. And you can imagine that I was pleasantly surprised when I got my hands on the full release of Elden Ring and realized that the item descriptions I thought I knew were now different to varying degrees, offering more, less, and sometimes different juicy flavor about the lands between. And so now we are going to dive into the items that changed the most and talk about what that means for our understanding of the world of Elden Ring and bask in a small bit of insight into From Software's iterative process of developing item descriptions that do so much to shape our understanding of their worlds. Let's get into it. First off, I want to briefly explain that while From authors the item descriptions, they work with a third-party company called Frog Nation, who collaborates to provide the final translated descriptions we get in the game. What we have in the closed network test were a collection of older iterations or From Software internal descriptions, which is very cool because we don't get many peeks behind the curtain, and this gives us some small insights into how they developed. And to kick things off, I want to look at some of the items that talk about the Royal Carrion Knights in the Academy of Raya Lucaria. In general, a lot of these items had name changes from the CNT to full release, such as the Carrion Glintstone Shield becoming the Carrion Knight Shield, the Carolus Mask becoming the Carolus Glintstone Crown, and the Carrion Sorcerer Staff becoming the Carrion Glintstone Staff. Now these aren't huge differences, but they change the flavor a bit and emphasize different facets of the Carrion faction. And one really interesting change was that the Carrion Glintstone Shield went from explaining that the Carrion Knights were originally established to counter the Academy to making it ambiguous, asking, just who were these knights preparing to fight? This is further demonstrated by the fact that the Sorcerer Hunter skill from the CNT that can parry magic became Carrion Retaliation in the full release, again taking the emphasis off of the Carrion royal family being at odds with Raya Lucaria. Now, the conflict between the Carians and Raya Lucaria still happened in the history of the region of Liurnia, where they both preside, but is now less of a focus. And I do think this was done to lessen the focus of the flavor on the tensions between these two groups, and to make it more generally about the conflict Caria had not only with the Academy, but also with the Golden Order and Marika, who sent armies to Liurnia twice. I think this is why the Carrion Knight Shield in the full release says excels when facing magic or holy attacks. And as a small final note about the Carrion item descriptions, the Carrion Piercer sorcerer description went from stating that the spell had blades of pure moonlight epitomize the protection the moon grants to Caria, to saying armed with this spell, sorcerers gain the strength of knights, their loyalty sworn to the moon. It's not a massive change, but there is no longer mention of protection from the moon and instead talks about loyalty sworn to the moon. Now let's get into the Raya Lucaria Academy item descriptions, which I think had some interesting overhauls. Glintstone Stars in the CNT talked about the spell being an ancient sorcery thought to be close to the primeval current itself. In the full release, we instead are told a sorcery of the Olivinus Conspectus, which attracts sorcerers from Celia, Town of Sorcery. This gives us more proper nouns and flavor about the Academy and the lands between, while also remaining true to the original description. The Olivinus Conspectus was founded by Lusat, a master sorcerer who is banished from the Academy for his pursuit into the primeval current. So it's more roundabout and less obvious in its connection to the primeval current, but it is still true nonetheless in the full release. And the Carolus Mask, now called the Carolus Glintstone Crown, is interesting in how it seems to show a change in the history of the Academy during development. In the CNT it said, a mask of heavy stone resembling the wise Carolus, a forefather of the Raya Lucarian resurgence, but in the full release it says, the Carolus Conspectus is the oldest of the Academy's lineages of study, begat by the sorcerer Azur. Scholars who follow in his footsteps pursue the mysteries of comets. And with that change, any mention of a resurgence is gone, and this lineage of study is referred to as the oldest. And even if Carlos was a person in the Academy's history, Azur has now taken center stage as the figure connected with this branch of study. The last bit about the Academy is tangential, but the Briars of Sin spell also underwent some changes. In the CNT it says that it is an aberrant sorcery discovered along with red glintstone by those exiled to the north for their crimes, and that the Academy reviles this sorcery which draws its power from faith. In the full release, this became an aberrant sorcery discovered by exiled criminals. Theirs are the sorceries most reviled by the Academy. The guilty, their eyes gouged by thorns, lived in eternal darkness. There, they discovered the Blood Star. Exiled criminals are still mentioned, but the Academy's reason for revulsion is less defined in the description, and it adds the evocative Blood Star. I do think that the Academy reviles this sorcery because of its connection to faith, and even though the North is not mentioned anymore, the leaders of the fire monks who dwell in the North on the mountaintop of the giants wield the thorned whip, which is modeled after the Briars of Sin. So in general, it seems that the information from the CNT description is probably still true, but is swapped out for some more evocative information, including the concept of the Blood Star. And while we're on the topic of evocative space stuff, let's talk about the interchangeably named Alabaster/Onyx Lords and the Underground Ruins. The Ash of War Gravitas in the CNT was referred to as a skill from a great white king with stone skin, and now is explained as a skill originating from the Alabaster Lords who had skin of stone. This isn't a huge change beyond getting rid of a king for a bunch of lords, but in general the gravity-related spells from the CNT have moved towards talking about the Alabaster/Onyx Lords. The Meteorite spell in the CNT stated that in the Eternal City, now lost in ruin underground, meteorites held the same import as stars. And now the spell's item description says, this sorcery originates from the Onyx Lords who had skin of stone and were called lords in reverential fear of their destructive power. From Software really loves these lords that they can't seem to decide how to name, and you might say they sound really similar, but maybe the Alabaster and Onyx Lords are different. And they're not. The Alabaster Lord's sword says, Great sword forged from a blue-white meteoric ore. The blade conceals gravity-manipulating magic, a weapon unique to the Alabaster Lords, a race of ancients with skin of stone who were said to have risen to life when a meteor struck long ago. And the Onyx Lord's greatsword says, Greatsword forged from the golden-hued meteoric ore, the blade conceals gravity-manipulating magic, a weapon unique to the Onyx Lords, a race of ancients with skin of stone who were said to have risen to life when a meteor struck long ago. Besides the hue of the meteoric ore, these weapons basically have the same description, but I would love to hear a treatise on the range of stone men who came to life when a meteor struck the lands between long ago, so feel free to leave it in the comments if you want to. And lastly, regarding the underground ruins, we have Magic Bubble from the CNT, which became Oracle Bubbles in the full release. Originally described as a lost, ancient glintstone sorcery used by wretches who dwell in the underground ruins, it now says sorcery of the claymen who served as priests in the ancient dynasty. The claymen search for lost oracles within their bubbles. It isn't saying anything totally new, but it is more evocative hearing about the claymen and lost oracles as opposed to some garden variety wretches, and the hook of learning more about this ancient dynasty is enticing. Now let's move into some items talking about the Golden Order. In general, these items talk much less about the Finger Maidens in the full release than they did in the CNT. Heal and other incantations that started with an incantation taught by Maidens of the Finger Reader now say incantation of the Two Fingers Faithful. And in the case of heal, as well as urgent heal, which has the same item description, another reference to the Finger Maidens is removed as The maidens served the two fingers by guiding the tarnished to grace in accordance with its mighty will, becomes the two fingers has high hopes for the tarnished that even if they should be wounded, even if they should fall, they will continue to fight for their duty. The Crimson and Cerulean Tear Flasks also remove information about the Finger Maidens, where originally they stated in the CNT that it is said that a Finger Maiden will bestow 2 such chalices upon the chosen tarnished when they meet, and in the full release it became, the one washed up on the gravesite was sure to die, until this flask offered its gift of rejuvenation, to seek the Elden Ring. My dorky in-world reasoning that isn't necessary because in reality it is strictly iterative changes from the item descriptions, is that the item descriptions were meant for your typical tarnished with a maiden, and once the scribes of the item descriptions in the Lands Between learned that our character was maidenless, they changed them all to better suit our situation. I can't believe Elden Ring is pandering to the player now. Really though, I think it makes more sense to keep the focus on the tarnished and the two fingers demanding obedience, as that is a central theme of the game and especially in the first half of the story. The Litany of Proper Death incantation brings up a more general change in that the more generic term lived beyond death used in the CNT is replaced in this item description and others with those who live in death, which makes sense as it is the official term used in the game and makes more sense with the lore of Godwyn and others existing in death, which in this world takes a more palpable and consuming form. For the Litany of Proper Death, the phrase produces an arc of gold that deals holy damage is replaced with creates an image of order, dealing holy damage to nearby foes, which is a stronger phrase and evokes the word order, and the Golden Order has explicitly removed destined death from the equation, which is why the Golden Order is so against those who live in death, which is a product of a fragment of the Rune of Death being used against the demigods and damaging the balance of the Golden Order. Which I think is why the final sentence of the Litany of Death went from, "These fundamentals hold that through study guided by the laws of the Golden Order, knowledge itself is the root of holiness," to, "The role of the hunters is to stamp out defiled reason, all for the perfection of the Golden Order." The more generic, if still interesting phrasing from the CNT is replaced with something that gets more at the heart of the major topic of destined death and its relationship to the Golden Order. Changing gears, Feast Upon Flame, now called Flame Sling in the full release, has changed in order to describe another threat to the Golden Order. Originally it stated an incantation from the Fire Monks, Guardians of the Giant's Flame of Ruin. Produces and throws a ball of raging fire. Charging up this incantation makes it more powerful and causes the ball to explode. Fire beguiles those who look upon it, those who would guard the flame would also come to worship it. In the full release it says, incantation originating from a sinister prophecy. Throws a ball of raging fire, charging enhances potency and causes the ball of fire to explode. The Flame of Ruin is anathema to the Erd Tree, but prophets sometimes glimpse it within the faith all the same. Sadly, when this occurs, their sole reward is banishment. The spell went from being an incantation of the Fire Monks who do guard the Flame of Ruin to being an incantation that sprung from a sinister prophecy seeing the Erd Tree burned by the Flame of Ruin, which does ultimately come to fruition in the game. The concept of exiled prophets was, and still is described by the prophet set that I will soon discuss, but it spreads out the details into the spell and gives more words to it, which makes sense to me. The blindfold of the prophet set originally said, blindfold of exiled prophets who foresaw that their faith would end in flames and were persecuted and driven from their homes as a result. After all, what use is eyesight to those who claim to know the true path? Now it says blindfold of exiled prophets who foretold misfortune and were persecuted and driven from their homes as a result. Why hesitate if the path leading to the future is clear? Just close your eyes and walk. They've taken out details of what the prophets saw, which could indicate there were various prophecies, but I personally think it's still likely the Flame of Ruin, and that they wanted to talk about that in a more appropriate item like Fire Sling, which also lets them spread the lore out a bit to let the players make the connection themselves. I'm glad the final line of the blindfold in the full release still has the same sass that it had in the CNT, which reads to me as a mocking tone that would come from some Golden Order stooge. Although Flame Sling was traded from the Fire Monks to the Prophets in the full release, the Fire Monks were able to seal the contract with the incantation O Flame. The wording of the item changes a bit, going from an incantation of the Fire Monks, Guardians of the Giant's Flame of Ruin, to incantation of the Fire Monks, the Giant's Flame still smolders upon the distant northern mountaintop, and the Fire Monks are its guardians. The description in the full release gives more detail and adds that tantalizing bit about the flame still smoldering, and stating that the mountaintop is to the north gives the player a direction to peer in, which wouldn't have mattered in the CNT anyways because you could not see the mountain. Changing topics, some items like the Dragon Scale Blade have changes that alter their very origin. In the CNT it said, a weapon forged from the memories of Dragonkin soldiers, burnished with the essence of draconic immortality. Alas, the Dragonkin never attained immortality, and perish as mere imitations of the ancient dragons. Now it says, a weapon made by sharpening a gravelstone scale, thought to be the source of ancient dragon immortality, into an unclouded blade. Alas, the Dragonkin soldiers never attained immortality, and perished as decrepit, pale imitations of their skyborn kin. While they both describe the ultimate failure of the Dragonkin soldiers, the blade is no longer forged from the memories of Dragonkin soldiers, a heady and metal concept, and is now a weapon made by sharpening a gravelstone scale, thought to be the source of ancient dragon mortality, into an unclouded blade. That's decidedly more grounded sounding, but also helps better explain the facets of the world, such as the Gravelstone being thought to be the source of dragon immortality. Gravelstone is mentioned elsewhere, like with the Dragon Heart, and this change may be a little less evocative to me, but it just makes more sense and fits better in context. Next we have the Spirit Jellyfish Ashes. In the CNT it said Spirit Ashes. Summons a spirit jellyfish, floating phantom that illuminates its surroundings, seemingly the lingering spirit of a young girl on an eternal search for her sister, with whom she'd promised to see the stars. In the full release it says, ashen remains in which spirits yet dwell, used to summon a spirit jellyfish, a floating spirit that illuminates its surroundings. Prone to tears, the jellyfish girl searches for her distant home. Will bravely spew poison at foes on her summoner's behalf. It seems her name is Aurelia. The description removes information about her sister and seeing the stars, but these bits are now expressed elsewhere as they exist in a very cute questline that has the extremely rare happy ending in a FromSoft game. And now I have one more item which I think has had the most egregious change made to its description between the CNT and the full release. In fact, I would go so far to say that this is my biggest disappointment from the CNT to full release with regard to the item descriptions, and one of the biggest mistakes Miyazaki has ever made. That is the turtleneck meat. In the CNT it said, a splendid, lengthy cut of turtleneck meat, material used for crafting items. Turtle meat is said to boost virility, but none in the lands between seem to have much appetite for it these days. In the lands between, the urge to reproduce has waned long ago. And now, in the full release, it says, a splendid, lengthy cut of turtleneck meat, material used for crafting items, considered an especially nutritious ingredient in the south of the lands between. I can't believe Miyazaki would remove the sexiest item description in Elden Ring and replace it with such a vanilla consolation prize. It is outrageous. I'm sure From Software had their reasons, but they're not good enough. Hashtag not my turtleneck meat. There are other minor changes to item descriptions between the CNT and the full release, of which you can check out more through a link in the video description, but these were the most significant. I think the changes were largely additive, and it was cool to get a peek into the process and gain more understanding about how they go about presenting lore in their games. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a like, and if you want more Elden Ring content from a guy who can't stop reading item descriptions, subscribe to The Lore Hunter. Thanks for watching. I would like to give special thanks for this video to JMH for helping support me on Patreon, as well as everyone else listed on the screen. Thanks so much for your support.